speaker today is Mike Leibowitz, who is now with Intel. Actually, he's been with Intel for how long? A couple of years now.
Since December 2006.
Oh, okay, not that long. So, okay, he did his bachelor's work at University of Texas, Austin.
That's correct.
And then moved up here to the rainy Pacific Northwest. He was telling me about his interview trip, which was in November on a rainy day. Never saw the sun. Came here nevertheless. Okay, it has been working in open office. So.
As stated, my name is Michael Leibowitz, and my talk, I had originally planned on having some sort of demonstrations of coding and etc. that were all predicated on the laptop having a dev environment, and which it does, and then being able to display that on the screen, which it does not. So you guys will have to use your imagination a lot.
Just SSH into your laptop?
It is
not on the wireless.
Possible. Do you have an SSH client on this?
It won't work on the wireless because inbound ports
go through.
are not going to work.
So, all right. Well, okay. So we can all gather around at some point, but I think that it's going to be a little bit difficult for you guys. I haven't put too much effort into my slides, based on the fact that I'll be going through the code. Anyway, so I just briefly who I am, the history of OpenOffice, and then a little bit about the OpenOffice community, a little bit about the code, and then questions and answers, and I may wander quite a bit from these slides. I made these at about 11 last night, showing that I plan ahead about as well as I expect you guys to. Or at least, I plan ahead as well as I did when I was a student in the position. So, yes, I started programming in Apple II Plus in, I don't even remember when that is, 6502 with at 2 megahertz with, I think that we were really rocking, I think we were 32K of RAM. And the computers I used actually got better and better until they got worse and worse, which I'll get into in a bit. And then I went to high school, did some Pascal and C in high school, and then I went to college, and I majored in computer engineering, which is, I don't know what the program, I think this is computer science program here, computer engineering. So at the University of Texas at Austin, it was sort of a mixture of hardware and software, and I wanted to do embedded systems. I'd become interested in embedded systems in high school, and so I thought that I just definitely wanted to be a computer engineer and touch hardware all the time, and now I never touch hardware at all. I know nothing about all of the latest and greatest Intel chips, other than what other people tell me. So I went to college, and we took our first programming class, C++ programming class, and I had just bought this I had the choice of buying a car or a computer, and I bought the computer, and I lived to regret that decision. And I got a very fancy computer, and I was running OS2 on it, because OS2 was just the greatest thing, because it had preemptive multitasking and had all this stuff, and you could sort of write programs in it in Rex, which in retrospect really sucks. And I took my C++ class, and I needed to compile it. So, okay. I went to IBM, and I wanted $650 for the compiler. And I'd already spent all my money on the laptop. I didn't have $650. I went to Microsoft. Surely that they would have a great deal. It was also $650. And these guys across the hall from me in the dorm, who I refer to as the nerds across the hall, they were running Linux. They were running, this was in 1996, they were running Slackware. And Linux comes with free compilers, I found out. That was really spiffy because I didn't have $650. But I did have a 33 megahertz machine that I cobbled together, and I found a 19-inch workstation monitor, and I cobbled it all together, and I had a working Slackware box, C++ compiler. And I just thought it was super excellent because I could now do my hacking all hours of the day, and in my dorm without having to get dressed and go to the computer lab. And I, basically, I'm not really a multitasker in that regard, so basically I just put my OS2 laptop under my desk and used Linux from, well, pretty much from then on. And it's changed a little bit in distributions and what I like to hack on, but pretty much I stayed with that. And then right around 1997 and 8, Linux was becoming increasingly popular, and also the internet was becoming very popular. And people were, I sensed an opportunity because people wanted these embedded systems that people had, like kiosks or embedded systems is such a, I don't know if you're familiar with embedded systems or not, it's such a broad field. There's all sorts of spectrum of embedded systems. But I thought, hey, this Linux stuff is great for embedded systems because it runs on all these, little processors like 68K and like all this, and it comes with TCP/IP and networking stuff, and you can develop on your desktop and then move over to a smaller processor. And I thought this is great. And this was also right around when PDAs were becoming more popular in the marketplace. And so I saw this great opportunity for these processors designed for Windows CE that you could run Linux on these as well, and they made fantastic embedded systems components. So me and some guys tried to start a company making these embedded Linux widgets. And while we were successful in starting the company, I wouldn't necessarily say we were super successful in running the company. So prior to, or just after, a venture capital partner told us that he wasn't going to give us that money, and no one ever would. For the following 3 reasons, which were not something we could readily change, I thought that maybe I should get a real job. So I went looking for a real job, and I went to a company called Cirrus Logic, a semiconductor company in Austin. Austin is loaded with semiconductor companies. And they had started an embedded processor division, and they were somewhat successful. At that time, they had 85% of the MP3 player market, which was just, in the Napster days when the MP3 player market was just taking off. And so I thought, this is great. I will go there and I'll run, I'll do Linux embedded systems there. And it turns out that they were a lot less interested in running Linux on an embedded system. They were a lot more interested, and their customers were a lot more interested in things that considerably less RAM. And these parts came with, they had a variety of parts, and so I sort of came full circle. The parts had 37 kilobytes of on-chip RAM. And some of them had a DRAM controller, and you could run Linux on them, and I imagined some Linux stuff with that. But I spent a lot of time in increasingly smaller and smaller amounts of RAM until by the time I left, I was becoming quite adept in running 4 kilobytes of RAM, actually running inside the cache of the part and doing bootstrapping code. And the things I learned from doing bootstrapping code is that nobody understands who's not doing embedded systems what bootstrapping code is, and nobody really cares either. And once you figure out how to do it 2 or 3 times, it becomes somewhat mechanical. So I decided that I wanted to change. So I decided that I was going to. I also decided it was too hot in Austin. I don't know if any of you guys have been there, but you're basically looking at. There are 2 seasons: the sort of wet season, not wet compared to here, and then the not wet season. The not wet season is about 9 months, and you can count on more or less 100 degrees and no rain. So I decided to quit my job in Austin and go tour around Europe. And then I found out that, my wife was going to have a baby, and we were homeless and jobless and needed a job and home pretty fast. And Intel was, I saw a job for Intel. They were looking for someone to do Linux on the desktop, and I thought, hey, I like Linux on the desktop, and I'm tired of embedded systems. And so then I became an Intel hacker, and Intel said, well, we really want you guys to look at OpenOffice. And I said, okay. And let's see, I guess I should talk briefly about Intel and Linux and OpenOffice. And so Intel is interested in Linux, and the group I was in was doing this OpenOffice stuff, and I have to say that I am not doing this OpenOffice stuff for Intel anymore. Really, I'm doing it more or less on my spare time. Intel is a very multifaceted organization, and so the reason that I don't know, she's actually a sister organization, that does open source stuff, and they were sort of the stepchild organization that lost their way. So Intel was interested in OpenOffice because Intel was interested in growing the Linux market share, and they felt the best way to do this was in the developing world in institutional settings, which means offices. And because they have an IT department, like I say, these 25,000 desktops are now on Linux. And we looked at the barriers to adoption. We looked at what office workers do all day, which seems to, for the most part, be check their email, surf the web, and work on documents. Checking their email and surfing the web pretty well work. It's well defined, and Firefox does a great job. And now the Office part was actually a little bit challenging because their Office suites are very complicated, and there were a lot of gaps there. So they said, oh well, we should make the Office suite look better. And they said, people complain that OpenOffice is slow and bloated, and you should probably go fix it. So a little bit about OpenOffice. So OpenOffice is a cross. Any of you guys have any familiarity with OpenOffice? Anyone tried programming OpenOffice or know anything about OpenOffice development?
It takes a long time to compile.
We'll get to that. Did you try compiling it?
Well, I wrote Genesis and inadvertently, yes.
Inadvertently,
yeah.
But you're protected from the compilation by
automation.
E-builds.
E-builds, right? E-builds just take care of it. Like the Debian, you can also build it, just add build or kind of source. But it really takes all the whimsy out of it because the wonderful maintainers that have taken all that trouble. So OpenOffice is a cross-platform office suite, very roughly analogous to Microsoft Office. So this means, spreadsheet, presentation, drawing program, and all of those things. But it also is an office automation system. And I wasn't really aware of what that really meant until I started working on the project. And Microsoft Office is too, but sort of a different way. And what I mean by that is OpenOffice actually has an API for just about everything. And the API, you can write a client that connects to OpenOffice that can do all of the things that OpenOffice can do, and you can drive the GUI, or you can make a web backend that has an OpenOffice process. People want this is a common thing that they want a .doc file to open document format converter, or a converter essentially, a web converter. And OpenOffice actually makes this fairly easy because there's an API and you can just say, okay, open this, and you say this is something else, and you can do it all through the API, which is, well, easy is sort of relative. It's a lot easier than writing it yourself, but the API is not super easy. And then lastly, there are literally millions of users all over the world using OpenOffice. And I don't know if I have a slide about yeah, I do have a slide on my hack on OpenOffice. So, of course, I hacked on OpenOffice at first because they told me to, and although I did have some choice in that, I do have to say it is very rewarding, I think. So I'm going to denigrate other projects briefly. So everyone, at least when I was in school, it seemed like everyone wanted to hack on the Linux kernel because it was sexy and hot, and also they kind of knew how to do it because and I feel like Linux kernel has, particularly Linux kernel has a sort of this unfair advantage because you can go to a class. At least when I was undergraduate, you had to take a class on operating systems, and for the examples in my operating system class, I mean, they took basically pieces of BSD and Linux, and they said, well, this is how this is how they do it, this is how they do it. And then Windows was sort of obtuse because nobody really has the source code. I mean, actually, lots of people have the source code because apparently, Microsoft Security leaks a lot. But nobody, at least in the university, was willing to talk about it. And so, even after I left my university, there was actually a class on Linux kernel hacking. You actually take this class, and then that's it. And by the end of the class, you can hack the kernel. And I'm not going to say hacking on the kernel is super easy because some of the worst coding practices I've ever seen are but the interface is fairly defined. The POSIX interface is understood. What it does and how it's supposed to behave is understood. And the code is very modular. You write a driver here, other than the libraries it depends on. You know, if you want to write a USB driver, the interface is very easily defined. Character, you know, the mouse driver does not depend on the keyboard driver in some unforeseen, strange way. They're independent, very modular, and this is not to say that is a bad thing, that is a good thing. But so with OpenOffice, things are a lot more complicated, and there's no real defined way of like, this is how an Office switcher works. No specification, other than file format specifications, which at best are incomplete and at worst are completely misleading. And remember, the open document format is basically created as implementation is going, so that's kind of cheating to say that you're building the application from specification, because the specification is kind of based on the application as it's being developed. And even the open document specification has lots of holes that if you look at it inside an Office suite, you would have considerable amount of trouble. Not to mention the fact that it's super complicated. And then also the Mozilla project a little bit. It is also fairly complicated and has a large code base, but the Mozilla project, you know, the browser interface, W3C defines a lot of this stuff, and you kind of know how it's supposed to work. And there's several other browsers out there and doing the same thing. Now, granted, Mozilla is like pretty much the only open source one, so to some extent they're in a similar light to OpenOffice. And the projects are to some degree similar in many ways. But having, so one rewarding part of it, very challenging. You know, when you start hacking in OpenOffice, you were going to learn something. I don't know if you wanted to necessarily know it beforehand, but you're going to learn something. And the methodologies of programming are actually also somewhat illustrative and interesting, because OpenOffice is a very big project, and it is also a formally proprietary project, which I'll get into in a moment. So you actually get to see how proprietary software is, or was, and you get to sort of see some of the methodologies that are being employed by professional software engineers, particularly in the German ones. And it's very rewarding because you get to appear in front of students who appear to be somewhat interested at least. And you have some notoriety, but also, I mean, literally millions of people use this. And so I made a, how to save 115 days of work every day. My first real hack, once I got over all of the hurdles of making a build and trying to figure out what the hell was going on, was to change the way SPR infos are parsed in the Microsoft document .doc file, basically importing engine. And there's an SPR info which has something to do with paragraph styles. I am not 100% clear because I tried not to get into the gory details of document interoperability. But basically I changed what was a binary search into a hash lookup. It was a fairly trivial fix, and is somewhat illustrative of a lot of OpenOffice development in various ways that I'll get into in a bit. But basically, my fix saved about, you know, depending on what is a typical document, between 12 and 20% of the time it takes to load a .doc file. A usually simple change. I think it was about 200 or 300 lines of code. And you know, I figure, okay, so I'm trying to remember how I did this calculation in the middle of the night last night, but essentially, I think that the average document time load, I think, was about 5 seconds. I say that means 20%. 20%, I'll be a little generous to myself. So that's 1 second. Every Office worker will say, well, it's 10 documents a day, and you're a million users, so I think that's 115 days saved every day. Assuming that, you know, everyone works every day and always opens the same number of documents every day, and they're the same documents. So it's somewhat of a naive assessment, but I did get a good sense of satisfaction. Like, I did accomplish something. With bootstrappers and bootloaders, and I can tell you that you do not get the same sense of accomplishment. I did have, you know, several times when I felt like, oh, I saved my employer like $500,000, so they didn't have to do a respin, and the user never has to know that the cache is completely and utterly broken. And by the time that they get to it, it seems to work. Nobody really, your boss will value you, not $500,000 worth, and nobody else cares because you've made the problem invisible. And embedded system works just a lot like that. And I think a lot of software work is actually like that. That nobody sees what you do because it's sort of unique. And again, I'll denigrate Linux kernel. If you improve the block player in Linux kernel, only a few people will notice. So a little history about the OpenOffice project. So the OpenOffice project was the Star Office project, which was started by a company called Star Division, founded by Marco, when he has the last name that I can't pronounce, in Hamburg, Germany in 1986. And Marco in 1986, I think that he was 17, and he decided that Microsoft had far too much power in the world, and that really he was going to fix it. And I guess in some way he has. It took a lot longer than I think he wanted, and I think Microsoft maybe still has a stranglehold on the Office environment. But so Star Office, you know, they say on Wikipedia, which is where I got these dates from. They say Star Office originates in 1994, and this is sort of, and the reason I put that in quotes is it's sort of misleading because they have a bunch of projects that were rolled into an Office suite. And so when you look at the code, you will, if you look at the code, you can actually find evidence of the 80s in there. The code is old enough. You rarely get to look at code in the open source community that's this old. It's sort of, it's not old like no one has touched it, but it is old enough that the problems with proprietary software are there in it, especially since after 2000 it was proprietary. Where you see that there are bits of code that nobody understands how they work. That guy's gone, and he didn't write good documentation, and now nobody knows how it works. And the comments essentially say, don't ever touch. And yeah, I wish I had my laptop working. Just cruise through the source and find me some really ugly bits to show you. And then so, Sun bought Star Division, and then it became Star Office. Well, it didn't become Star Office. It was Star Office 5.2 that they released in public as a free, but free as a beer product, which I remember eagerly receiving because my other choice, I had, when I was in college, for Office suites, I had Emacs and Latex. I don't know if you guys have ever used Latex before. Actually, not too bad, but a little bit cumbersome for sending around documents that other people tend to edit. And then there was WordPerfect for Linux. That was a sort of failed experiment that Corel had underdone. And then there was Star Office. And Star Office it worked well, but when you launched Star Office, does anyone remember Star Office 5.2? And you launched and the whole desktop came up. It was like a whole GUI in one. And that was really obnoxious because I already had a GUI and I didn't understand why they had this GUI at all. This is history. So in 1986, they ran this on DOS. And that's where the GUI sort of comes from. It's all the way back. Anyway, the GUI is gone, but its tentacles remain. And they open sourced it in 2000 in the OpenOffice project. And so the way that sort of worked is that it was forked, essentially. So OpenOffice was the free fork of Star Office. And Star Office still exists today as a sort of value-added product. And they had two licenses for OpenOffice. The SISL, the Sun Industry Standards license, which was stupid and evil. And then they had the LGPL, which is nice. And so the thought was, at Sun, was that if you're a big company or any company and you want to improve OpenOffice, basically you want to improve OpenOffice and have it as a proprietary product, you can do that by licensing SISL, and then you don't have to release your code based on a bunch of money. IBM actually did this. But there was a growing force within Sun that decided that they didn't like that Sysl was bad. And so Sysl was deprecated. There is no more Sysl. OpenOffice is LGPL. And the Star Office part of that, because so how do they maintain this fork if my code is in Star Office? Yes, it is now. So how does Sun do that is what they call the joint copyright assignment. So when you become a developer for OpenOffice, when you want to submit code to OpenOffice, you have to sign a joint copyright assignment where basically you say that Sun and you jointly hold the copyright, and that allows them to relicense your code as a proprietary product. Which I think gives a lot of people the heebie-jeebies, but I will remind you that the Free Software Foundation also requires you to do copyright assignment and contribute to their project. When you contribute to GCC, you have to do copyright assignment to FSF. The granted, FSF is not going to resell your code as part of a proprietary project, but it's not the. I think that there's a false impression out there that Sun is making a mint off of the the open source community is the army of volunteers that is, and then relicensing the Star Office, and Star Office is a big money loser for Sun. And OpenOffice is really, there's no duality of contribution at Sun that this is only for Star Office, this is only for OpenOffice, or this is not for OpenOffice, and then developing back for it. It really is that OpenOffice is their primary focus. NeoOffice is a fork. I think it's still under. I think it's under LGPL as well. So, and it's from Asia somewhere. And once upon a time, we were going to talk to the NeoOffice people because the NeoOffice people had compiled OpenOffice until C compiler, and some naive people inside the thought that using ICC, the Intel C compiler, optimizers for Intel hardware very well with just alleviate all of our performance problems, and then they talked to NeoOffice and they found that was in fact not really true, and so it was actually they didn't talk to the NeoOffice people. Although there are
NeoOffice is what I remember my license.
yeah, so yeah, it's true. They also have the Mac OS native one, and there is a Mac OS native port for OpenOffice. To keep my distance away from that important people. There are a bunch of different sort of forks out there, derivative projects. I wouldn't necessarily call them forks. There's Red Office, there's one or two others in China. I think there might be one in Japan. But for the most part, they're not real. Red Office is struggling to be a real fork in the sense that they have code, but they don't have the wherewithal to sort of bring the project forward. So they're still in the community that they're putting their code back, and a lot of their value add is in CJK localization support, Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. So let's see, I was going to talk more about history. So I talked a little bit in the abstract about what it means to be an old. What it means to have an old project, and one of the implications of that is that old code sticks around. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then there's sort of a weird thing about tools. Are you guys familiar with CVS? Yeah. So you can't move it, you can't rename anything in CVS in history, right? And you can't delete a directory in CVS. So this is a bizarre example of how things that you don't think about start to make your code a little strange. So remember the desktop in OpenOffice, right? So they decided to reuse the top level directory desktop because it was there and because CVS won't let you rename things. So actually, there's several examples of this where there's directories with stuff in them, and you're like, what is in desktop? And in fact, it is the basically blank application, the thing that opens files. And instantiates the application thing, desktop. And then there's the sort of, if you look in, this is such a shame because I'm cruising the code right now. Actually, does this have an internet connection?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, so no problem. So let us see if I can remember things right. No, I don't. This is going to be a pain because this is my module name and stuff. Regex. That's what I want to do. Okay, so this is cell2.csx. So this is actually the implementation of the spreadsheet cells. And you say, okay, so what is the 2? Why is there 2? You find that, that's Microsoft now. By the way, there's the LGDL. This is by, OpenOffice, they use 2 and 3-letter codes for all the Sun developers who mostly to confuse me. I'm convinced. I don't know who my HMI is. The big spreadsheet guy is NN, that's Neville. In fact, so the OpenOffice team, if you think about the people at Sun who OpenOffice, I would say there are about 80 people at Sun Hamburg. And I would say 60 of them, maybe 50 of them, are actual hardware developers, developing a core of OpenOffice. I've heard estimates that at Microsoft they have 1,000 people developing a core of Office. So, and in fact, the core of Calc is one dude. It's Nicholas Neville. So what is cell 2? Why is there a 2 at the end of cell when it's cell and cell 1 and cell 2 and cell 3 and cell 4, etc.? Well, so in DOS, you couldn't have a file that was more than 65 40K, 65 by 36 bytes. So in response to that, I just started making, when cell became too big for 64K file, they just said, well, make cell 2. And there's some that go up to 9, and then things have been refactored a little bit. So then they're missing digits because they refactored out like maybe 4 and 5, and so you're 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, and you're wondering, how did I get here? And the reason they do that is partly an artifact of CBS because they don't want to lose that history of local changes around there. And now I feel like we're completely off track. Where are we? Not very good at that. We'll see. There we go. I'm not very good at doing sort of PowerPoint or press presentations, so some of my info colleagues are they do everything in slides. So let's see. So and then there's the community, and OpenOffice has a reputation of having a troubled community, and it's sort of true, but not in the way you may have heard. So, and by the way, I may say a bunch of negative things about hacking on OpenOffice. You want to sound, I don't want to sound too negative. I mean, I do actually enjoy hacking on OpenOffice, not that I do it in my spare time, but I feel like I want you guys to contribute to OpenOffice. I want you guys to get involved in OpenOffice. But I also want to give you a little bit of background that will make it not so impossible to start developing with OpenOffice. And by the way, there is an extension project like there is with Mozilla or Firefox, and it is sort of, I think the public face of that is under construction, but the coding part of that is all there. So you can actually, I put this in perspective as, looking at the OpenOffice core, a lot of things that sort of come next. If you just want to do extensions, will not be as much of an issue for you because actually the extensions you never really have to compile it, and you more or less just need to be able to keep with the API and use the API. And I think for a lot of things, that probably work. I mean, for a lot of things that works. Like if you want to implement a slightly, a new feature, a new importer, a new button, extensions work. But if you want to say, make importing calc documents faster, that doesn't work. You need to be a core developer. And I also want to encourage you to be a core developer because, extensions is for sissies. The core development stuff is very sexy, very, very challenging, and can lead you into all sorts of new and interesting things that you never even dreamed of. So when in OpenOffice, they talk about the community. And so there are sort of two usages of the community. I'm using the usage that I like, which is the developer community, because I think this is an open source project that's sort of centric to developers. OpenOffice, because it is so large, has a lot of people who are not developers associated with it. People who are attracted to the open source nature of it and its sort of disruptive effect. There's a lot of people involved in public policy and bringing open source into public policy, and the advantage of doing that, and they're part of the broader community. And then there's a marketing project. It's a real project. It is the marketing project, which is a lot of the best and I'm trying to think of the best way to put this without being insulting. There are a lot of boosters of OpenOffice who think that OpenOffice is really great and want to spread its adoption. And some of these people in the marketing project they're not just, a lot of the people in the marketing project are not just fanboys, but they have a real motive. Several of them are OpenOffice consultants, work with businesses around OpenOffice. Because remember when I told you that OpenOffice had this rich API? Well, there are a lot of companies that use OpenOffice as part of their thing. Actually met a few different people. Like for example, when I went to the last OpenOffice conference, I talked to a company, and they had a robot that would sit on your network. It was a migration robot. Put on your network, and it would crawl around and find all the documents on your network. And then it would analyze the documents. It would analyze, do they import well, do they not import well, do they have macros, what macro piece, what VBA stuff do they use, do we support any of that, is there a known mapping, and then it had various AI heuristic tools for this, and then if they found things that it didn't know, it would bin them for a consultant to look at. Eventually, the agreement would be reached with the company, we put this on the network, and then at a certain time later, they come and they tell you a dollar amount to convert everything to OpenOffice. And they track everything, with OpenOffice and with other things like how often is this file modified, how often is it read. It's actually very interesting. And I'm sort of lumping them into the marketing project because they're also looking to expand the usage of OpenOffice because it directly impacts the business. There are quite a few consultants along similar lines that do similar things. And then there's a very large native language confederation, which are the people who localize OpenOffice to many bajillion languages that it's localized for. I lost count. There's so many. There are languages I didn't even know existed. And I think you can even get it in Esperanto. So they're centering on developers. So I say developer community. Developer community, I don't want to say is anemic, but the developer community needs your help. So the developer community basically falls into Sun and the hackers. So in the Sun camp is Sun. There's 80 individuals I talked about before. These are professional software engineers at Sun Microsystems in Hamburg, Germany. I've got the name of the street, but they're in nondescript building. And these are the Star Office people. They have been there forever and ever. Very nice people. I've met many of them. But they're definitely they're both German and proprietary software engineers making open source software. So they have a process. The specs are written. There's a planning meeting, plan on what we're going to do. We do it. There's QA. And this is not to denigrate their process, because that is important for them, and it is a valuable way for them to proceed. But then there's sort of the hackers. And in the hacker camp is Intel, Novell, Google, and a smattering of other individuals and companies, Productive, a bunch of other people. Basically, if you're not Sun and you're a developer, then you're a hacker. Because you are not present in those planning meetings and those, and those spec writing systems. And so, when they first started, when they first started to open source the project, they actually had some classes on how to behave in the open source community because they didn't know. If you try to put yourself in their position, so you've been working on this project for 5 to 10 years, and you know all of how it works and doesn't work, and you have a plan on what you're going to do for the rest of the quarter or year or whatever into the next release, and how you're going to develop it, and how the architecture is going to sort of meander, and how that's going to go and schedule and all that. And then some guy who's never heard of it before shows up and says, really, if you did this like this and this like this and this like this, rearrange this like this and this and that, it would work a lot better and it'd be way better. And here's a patch, by the way. It might break in a few places, and yeah, here you go. And this guy's like, I didn't ask for this. This guy just comes in, breaks something, and then leaves. And now the some developers are not, they don't have that mindset now, but that duality of workflows still exists in some respect. And so, there still is an insider-outsider bit to it, and they're very receptive to outside patches, but it can be quite frustrating if you're not at Sun with what seems to be difficulties in getting things upstream. And they know that this is difficult, and they want to fix it, and they're working to fix it. So don't consider this is not a warning to stay away. This is, come join the hacker community. So let's see, and how many hackers are there? Let's say there are about 20 hackers outside. No, more. 30, 40. Well, IBM is sort of a quasi-hacker because they are not really contributing patches back because they're stuck with Sysl, but they might come back to LGPL. I don't know how big their team is because nobody wants to talk to them because they're proprietary software people. So OpenOffice is big. Really, really, really big. Really, really big. 6 million, depending on how you count, between 6 and 8 million source lines of code. And that 230K is my last sort of guess. I didn't count them. I should feel ashamed. Anyway, so I think that's about right. About 230,000 source files, and consequently, compiles take a long time. How long is a long time? Well, that depends on how fast a computer you have. One of the community hackers, Napoleonic, has been helping the city of Key Largo. The city of Key Largo runs everything on OpenOffice, and they just got a brand new machine, and he wanted to see how fast their machine was. They got this enormously fast 8-processor Xeon machine, the latest core through whatever it is. And they were actually able to nail a compile in, I think, an hour, which is a record. When I started with OpenOffice, we were looking at, on my seemingly fast desktop machine, 12 hours to do a compile. On a Windows machine, we were looking at 22 hours to do a compile. That can be a problem. So that can be a problem. If you run Gen 2, you know that it's a problem because, well, the problem is just that it takes a long time to implementation because you have to compile everything with all the latest optimizations right now. But the problem is with this compile is that people show up to the project and they want to try it out. And so the first thing you do, at least the first thing I do when I want to play with a project, download it, I compile it, I run it, and I poke at it, and then I compile it again and see what broke. Okay, so compile it. Now, that's like 12 hours and when I knew what to do. It took me a week to get my first OpenOffice compile that actually worked. There were innumerable problems with getting it to work and getting it to go. And so much so that, in fact, there is no, I have a slide somewhere about build systems. So I don't have, so there are about, so there are 6 known build systems. OpenOffice, so the developers at Sun, they have compiler engineers, they build engineers. And I think there are about 2 or 3 of them. Their job is to keep OpenOffice building so developers don't have to. The Sun developers have a very specialized system that literally checks out the object files from an NFS share and then re-updates their, what they call the solver, and so they don't have to compile it. And this whole big tooling and their platform is unknown outside of Sun. That's one. And a little bit about why that is such a problem. I don't know if you guys are familiar with ABI compatibility. You guys know what I'm talking about when I say ABI compatibility? ABI compatibility is libc, library has an interface, an API interface, but you don't expect, so you can compile things against the same API interface with the header. You don't expect everyone who runs your program to compile it, so you want the library to sit on the system, you want your binary to be deployed to the system, and they should match correctly. If you just have one type of system out there, like say Microsoft Windows, it always does, because Windows is built with this and you built with this, and they match. Now with Linux, things are tricky, because there are a lot of different Linuxes out there, and they compile with different options, and they have different versions. And so will a binary that works on SUSE work on Debian? Probably not. Especially if versions are mixed. Now there is an upward compatibility or a backward compatibility of ABI usually. So if I compile on a really old copy of SUSE, it will probably work on most Linux systems out there. And so in fact, that is what OpenOffice does. They have a version of SUSE 7.3 that is horribly modified. This is to make their ABI compatibility work across the Linux platform. So you get an official build from OpenOffice. When you go to the OpenOffice page and you download it, it is compiled on this hacked up SUSE 7.3 image, which we're trying to get them to sort of share, but then it's the same problem as the old code. The guy who made that, I guess, isn't there anymore. Nobody knows exactly how to create it. And there are, this whole side topic of ABI compatibility. There's projects like LSB that aim. How am I doing that time? How much time do I have? It's about 20 minutes. Oh my god, I've talked forever. I thought 90. Slot 90 minutes. Jesus. I thought that this was a monumental amount of time to talk, and I would never fill it. Apparently, I'm a big one day. So, ABI compatibility. So there's Sun's build system. There's the localizers have a specialized build system for their localizations. Red Hat uses a hacked up Sun build system. Google has their own parallel clustering build system. And then there's the OOO build system, which is what the Novell. Basically, most of the Linux people use this. If you use Gentoo, if you use Debian, and you use Debian flavors, you use SUSE, everybody with Red Hat, essentially, you're using OOO build to build OpenOffice. And OOO build is a wrapper, and it's great. OOO build makes compiling OpenOffice mostly work like you think it would. You type configure, then you type, they have a special step called download, which actually downloads the source columns. Remember why I said it was so big? We're talking about like approximately 3 gigs of source. So they chop all that up and it downloads it, because if you use CVS, it can take like an hour to download all that stuff. And that's on fast connection. Oh yeah, I meant to talk about the tool. I'll get to that in a bit. So you type configure, download, and then you type make, and it patches. It has a sort of library of patches. It patches everybody can make a build right and put some enhancements that are not quite upstream. And so, take nothing away. Know that what you really want, if you want to start building, want to start developing OpenOffice is the OOO build wrapper, because it'll take you forever to get the Sun publish wrapper, publish build system, which we refer to as vanilla. So OpenOffice is weird. OpenOffice has, throughout its history, a little bit of everything, and because it's cross-platform. And I mentioned cross-platform programming is really hard, because you can't possibly own everything that it has. So very quickly, I programmed Linux forever, I used string, I think. STR, what was it, index? No, it was string. It just works, right? It's not there on Windows. Apparently that's a BSD, not a POSIX thing. And the only way I found out, not having Windows was to try it in, but I got someone who's like, your code doesn't work. And I had to go through it. Anything's cross-platforms. It's a little bit tricky. To do this cross-platform, they have all of these different things that you take for granted on one platform. Like they have 6 different string classes. Part of that is history, and part of that is compatibility. Because by the way, you can program OpenOffice in any language, just about, not any language. Java, C++, Basic, Python, I think Ruby soon. And they have an object component framework that makes this all transparent, though. Well, not quite transparent, but makes this all possible with the thing that goes between them is string. So they have a lot of string classes. They have dmake, their own make. You can't just say make. It is dmake, which is different. They have orb, which I'll get to in a minute, which is the object broker. And then included, because say Windows doesn't have it by default, is all of these free things that you'll be compiling to, like Python, Mozilla, STL, Boost, Berkeley DB, FreeType, XML, SAC, Xerxes, all those things. You get them for nothing. And then we always have new developers. We butter them up to join the OpenOffice project and jump into the Blender. So this is the Blender. So what this is, and I've stolen this from a presentation that the manager of the StarOffice team did at the previous OpenOffice conference in Lyon, where he was complaining about OpenOffice was just too complicated. This is the module interdependency graph. It's actually truncated a bit, but this is a little bit extraordinary. And what this means is basically, once you make a change, if you make a change here, you may have to rebuild all of that stuff. That might take a while, and if you don't rebuild it properly, it's not going to work. And this is confusing. All developers kind of know after a while. You get a hint of like what things depend on. So you just have to, the quickest time I went from hack to build to test was 8 minutes, and through all the tooling, and that's actually gotten quite a bit faster lately. So once you actually master your little bit of the code that you're playing with, it isn't so bad, but it gives you sort of a little bit of a picture of how difficult it is to navigate the code base when you first get into it. And then there's UNO. So UNO is the Universal Network Objects, the Object Broker Framework, which is, if you're familiar with Microsoft.com, it's like Microsoft.com, except for a little less elegantly, it's a little less elegant to use, or so I'm told I've never used it. Now what an object broker is allows you to create objects and which are referred to as services, and methods are interfaces, attributes are properties, by the way. Basically allows you to do an inter-process communication and use your objects across 2 processes. And these processes can be separated across the network, or they could be separate languages. Java is not in the same process as C++, so if you want to write something that uses the API in Java, it uses the API. The other side of the API is written in UNO is C++ using the UNO bindings. And there's an API contract that bridges the gap that says like things like this. This is what you can expect from the object. This makes things very verbose because the types have to be strongly specified, because even if your language is not strongly typed, like Python, C++ is, and Java is, so therefore it's the lowest common denominator is. And it also makes extra steps that you may not be familiar with that take a little bit, getting a handle on, like the IDL, which is the API contract, this descriptive language. And then there are all these namespaces, which is a ode to Java, I guess, com, sun, star, configuration, backend, multi-layer stratum service. Very verbose, which makes the code, when you're just looking at it, you look at it, all this stuff. But you start to get the hang of it. And this is actually something, new skill that you can pick up. This is actually a very cool thing, is the object broker, as much as I sometimes think it's a pain. But the ability to actually do this is very, very cool and is very desirable to be able to basically publish an API that anybody can use in any language, and that you can actually, everything you can do in C++ with OpenOffice, you can do in BASIC. Through, they have Star Basic, you could write an entire application, full-fledged application. I recommend that you don't do that, but you really could. And these applications actually mix their code. So the wizards for many of the applications are actually written in Java. Most of the code is actually written in C++. But the newer applications, some of them, Base is the newest application and has a greater proportionality of Java in it. So let's see, source tooling. So if you're an OpenOffice developer, things become confusing because unlike a regular project where there's CBS and you just download the source and then you commit to CBS, in OpenOffice, everybody has their own branch. There are about 200 active branches for every change you do is going to happen in a branch, and they have what we call master workspaces. So source 645 is OpenOffice 1.something. Source 680 is current, and then 00 and then blank. So OOF is 2.22b. Where 680 and 645 come from, nobody knows. Really, I have asked all over Sun, the release engineers, the people who oversee the version control system, nobody knows where this number comes from. But this is what they're called, and they have these milestones. So the milestones are, it's basically like a tag in the master workspace. So you're a developer, you're developing against source 680, which is basically the trunk. And you make your branch, and your branch can be open for a long time. Do your changes, and then they make a new milestone, which is a new release, and you can actually sync your branch back up to the milestone and get in all those changes so you stay current. And that way you don't have a merge or hell at the end. And then when you're done, you say that your build is ready for QA. Right, vanilla build. Getting production. So you have your child workspace and you mark it as ready for QA, and then basically the way all these branches come together is a QA rep. QA is your code, and then they integrate 5 to 10 branches together back into the next milestone. This is a tricky process because things that were not a bug in your child workspace and passed all the QA tests in your child workspace, they may find out later when they other guys' child workspace. They conflicted in some horrible way to make some previously unknown bug appear. And that will be fixed in the next milestone. 10 more minutes. Man, I got to talk fast. And then child workspaces have 3 states, 4 states, or 5 states, however many you have it. Plan, new, ready for QA, integrated. Basically, you open child workspace, you do your code in it, and then you say it's ready for QA. Back, integrated. We talked about this, vanilla, remake. There is the developer's guide, about 1,300 pages of it. The developer's guide is for API users. So while it does give you, OpenOffice uses its API internally as well as externally. And so while it does give you a window onto how things work a little bit inside, if you want to do extensions, the developer's guide is really, it is the gospel except for when it lasts. There are a few places where it'll steer you a little bit wrong. And then there's the API reference, which the API is always right the descriptions, but very occasionally are a little bit wrong. There is the Lexer, which you saw before. Oh, not that one. Not that one again. The Linux cross-referencer. You can put in identifiers and it will search the code for you. Searching that much code takes a really long time on the computer. And in fact, the code is so big that a lot of tools break. I've yet to find a good set of tools that I can use, with a fully integrated development environment that can actually work. When you put OpenOffice into Eclipse, CDT, it just rolls over the dies. Okay.
I'm wondering if there's any work in the direction of simplifying the code base.
Yes, so this is something that we need your help for this. The thing is that the code is in desperate need of refactoring and reduction, and people are working on this and making the build. All of these things that I talked about, people are actively working on that. There's been some tremendous progress in making the build simpler and better to use, making the upstreaming process easier. But there are still a few kinks. So simplifying the build simplifying the source is a little bit hard because to simplify the source you have to refactor that huge interconnected graph. But I do welcome you to come try. And really it's not impossible. So the part that loads StarOffice 5.2 files is actually like a hacked up midget version of StarOffice 5.2. And it's called bin filter. Some of the distros don't even build it. And someone went in, one developer went in, and I think they took out about 900 methods out of bin filter that weren't being used. I mean, there are many places where deprecated code is being used, and if that deprecated code could be moved over to the news, the 6 string classes, 4 of them are deprecated. So all you have to do is get rid of 4 string classes, find all those places where they're being used, move them. But the Sun just doesn't have people to do that. They're constantly catch up with Microsoft and they're constantly trying to improve interoperability. Developers complain about the unwieldiness of the source code, but users don't really. They complain that it's slow and that slowness is an artifact. But users complain that their .dot file isn't override. And they complain a little and it takes 30 seconds. So I definitely encourage you, and there is a lot of low-hanging fruit here. I mean, there is a lot of stuff where once you get acquainted, you can actually do this. And although users may not love you, all the developers will. You will definitely earn the respect of your peers by cutting out code. OpenOffice needs a code shrinkage more than anything else. I mean, if you run a cut and paste detector on OpenOffice, which, by the way, you need a machine with 14 RAM to do this, but there is a cut and paste detector out there, and the list of cut and paste code is huge. It's a huge amount of code that is just cut and pasted, where they ported something over from there and they can refactor appropriately. And you don't need to be a super expert to be able to do this, and it gives you a lot of familiarity. I mean, this sort of refactoring stuff gives you a lot of familiarity with the code in different areas. I mean, that's why we give performance as opposed to interoperability working in code, because we wanted to sort of raise all over the code. Performance brought us into all sorts of different parts of the code. Interoperability, you'll stay in the systems. And refactoring is like that too. And I think that it's a fantastic idea for you guys to get involved in refactoring. It is great exposure to all sorts of different sorts of code. It will be a learning experience. I really think that. Finding stuff. So there's the Lexer, there's asking the developer community, and getting to know the developer community and getting help from the developer community. I think it's actually the most important part. I think the most crucial part about getting involved in OpenOffice development. People do want to help you, and people do want to sort of give you help along the way. But you have to figure out how to get to the community. There's the OpenOffice wiki. There's the OpenOffice mailing lists. There's the OpenOffice IRC channel. Dev.openoffice.org. I invite people on Freenode and all the time. too much for you and you just want to get the code, you just want to hack at it, and you just want to submit a patch, they do have a regular bug tracker. You can just like throw your patch into the bug tracker. And once you sign the JC, eventually your code will go in. Now, eventually, it could take a long time. Remember that thing I talked about where I sped up and saved 115 days? That took 13 months to get upstream. I actually, this was aggravated by several sort of issues, like leaving a son who had taken the son to his wing, and et cetera. But I actually sort of used the process along. I made a birthday cake for my bug. I put the bug number on the birthday cake. Let's see. Find it. By the way, go.org is also a great resource that has links to all these things. Blah, 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 blah. This is the trail of the bug. And then, this is me and my bug. Issue number 555. This is now integrated. Very end here. Checked in. OOF 680M2. Source 680M200. That means that OpenOffice 2.2 will have it. Oh, by the way, the 2.01, 2.02, 2.4, all these versions are meaningless. They had a release schedule. The difference between 2.01 and 2.02 is big. I don't know why the version numbers do not reflect this, but that's just the way it is. And they're trying to reformat it. So you can see, I started this on August 8th, integrated on January 26th. So you can contribute patches, and this is sort of an exceptional case. And Sun does know that this is a problem, and they are trying to fix this. But this is where engaging with the community is helpful, because I knew the guy to go call and say, hey, my bug not upstream. What's going on here? What's the problem? But then he quit. So then I took a call. But don't worry, that guy works for November. I guess I should wrap it up. It looks like I need to go. There's so much to do. I'll be around here somewhere, I guess. I don't know, it's lunch after this. If anyone wants to stick behind, I'll be happy to talk. Apparently, I can talk for a long time. And I really do, if you are interested, get involved in the community. If you can do some experiment, find out about it. Even things that don't seem like they're really useful are useful. Like, for example, making sure that it builds on your favorite Linux distributions and fixing it when it doesn't. People value that. Even things like deleting dead code, people value that. Or fixing comments, or translating German comments. Oh, by the way, one last tidbit: if you see something with German comments, that means nobody knows how it works. All of a sudden, guys speak German. That means that nobody knows how it works. So the unwritten rule is that we need to change. That I'm relying on you guys to change. Is that if you see German comments, that means don't touch. Okay, well, thank you very much.
I don't think there's another class in here for a while, so if you have questions, you can
Hey there, man. What's up, Jeremy?
Are you guys joining up for lunch?
Okay. You can go back and talk with us sometime after anyway.
Do you know him from
So we host a couple of the build boxes.
Right.
And we're looking to do clusters, but